Okay, so good evening, good morning, or good afternoon to everyone across the world. So welcome back to Lohan Academy's Frontier Dialogue. And today's topic is how shall we develop the technologies to embrace AI technology? So the motivation is that everyone today cares about AI. We have the national strategies. We have companies. Every company is setting up their strategies, and every individual's worry about the future. But the fact remains that we simply do not really know how to embrace AI technology. Let me provide a couple of observations. One is that if we look at the world, there's glaring difference in AI adoption. Now, so some will talk about US, talk about China, but how about Europe? How about Japan or the rest of the world? How come some of the countries with glorious history embracing technology couldn't catch a break? So what's going on here? And so, and that's one observation. Another observation is that if we look at the many countries, they really have national strategies to develop AI, and the companies pouring unprecedented amount of money into AI, but without exactly know how to do this right. So those are some of the basic observations. So that prepare us to come up with the today's motivations that we would like to talk about the technology to embrace AI technology. So we would like to gather some of the best minds, draw lessons, wisdoms from history, assess the present, and look into the future. Now, uh, with that, let me introduce the first speaker today, Professor Carlota Perez, who is the honorary professor of technology and development at University College London. Carlota is a thought leader and leading scholar of technological change and economic development, and best known for her work on how major technological revolutions reshape economies and societies over the long run. And I'm a big fan of her landmark book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital. And actually, the second edition of her book is being launched very soon. I believe within 2 weeks in China, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm going to really recommend this book to everyone. And so, uh, anyway, let's hear what Clota would like to tell us about what she thinks about the issue. Clota, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you for the invitation, and I will be talking to you about shaping technological revolutions in turbulent times, and I will refer to the historical lessons from history. That's what will be the framework of what I will be saying. So I will cover 3 points: what is and is not a technological revolution. Then how do technological revolutions propagate and how are they shaped? And finally, I will take a look at the road ahead for China and the West and wonder if what we have ahead is a global golden age for the information revolution. So first of all, a revolutionary technology is not a technological revolution. What is a technological revolution? It is a set of interrelated and interdependent revolutionary technologies and technology systems, including new and dynamic products and industries, as well as a low-cost input, like now we have chips and data, and before we had oil, and before that steel, and before that coal, and so on. And a new infrastructure, like we now have internet, and before we had roads and electricity, and before that we had ships and transcontinental railways, etc., and so on. And it is also capable of reducing the cost and increasing the productivity of every single sector of the economy, leading to a complete paradigm shift, a complete shift in common sense for technology and for business and for the economy and even for organizations, and requiring a major reorganization of the whole socio-institutional framework. A revolutionary technology is a major scientific and technological breakthrough with the capacity to transform many sectors of the economy and society and of creating new technology systems. It follows and strengthens the paradigm of the prevailing revolution and acts as an integral part of it. I guess you have all guessed that I'm trying to distinguish the revolutionary technology that AI is from the information revolution to which it belongs. So each technological revolution involves several revolutionary technologies in powerful synergistic interdependency. So let's look, for instance, at plastics, a revolutionary technology with its many systems. So we have successive systems downstream, consumer durables, industrial supplies, all of those, plus successive technologies upstream, injection, compression, blow molding, everything to be able to use the plastics, and assembly, measuring and control instruments, lubricants, etc., etc. So basically, plastics was an incredible revolutionary technology that replaced all sorts of natural materials, and it really felt like a huge transformation. But all these systems and that particular revolutionary technology and various others were within the mass production revolution and strengthening its paradigm. So the previous revolution, the one that plastics belonged to, was the mass production revolution from 1913 with the moving assembly line to exhaustion in the 1970s. The whole of the stagflation we had in the 70s and all that is because that revolution was dead. It was spent, no more productivity, and that's why it had to globalize. Everybody got out of the countries where it was expensive, looking for low-cost labor or whatever, because they could no longer increase the productivity of mass production. So what did we have? We had mass production as a system, as a way of producing, and also continuous processing, plus oil refining and petrochemicals, and each of them with several systems and revolutionary technologies downstream and upstream. So the current information revolution is still exercising modernization and creative destruction on those systems and networks while creating new ones. So that was all consistent with itself. And then it just is now being transformed by another revolution, which is not yet well organized like that one. So why is it important to understand this? Because however crucial it is to guide artificial intelligence to the best social and economic outcomes, the effort can only succeed in the context of shaping and providing directionality to the whole information revolution, of which AI is an increasingly important and inextricable part. It is essential to the information revolution. So how do technological revolutions propagate and how are they shaped? We have 4 previous revolutions to learn from. The Industrial Revolution, the age of steam, coal, iron, and railways. Before that, the age of steel and heavy engineering, the first globalization. And, after that, then the age of the automobile, oil, petrochemicals, and mass production. They are all profoundly different, but their propagation has followed the same basic pattern. Their trajectory has been an S-curve with 2 contrasting periods. They, of course, this is the new revolution. It always coexists with the previous and coexists at the end with the next. So the first period is the installation period. The last one is the deployment period. And in between, there is something that I have called a turning point, which is the time when all the problems created by the installation period sort of come to the surface and become a problem. And the deployment period is like the solution to all those problems. So the installation period is a turbulent and unequal creative destruction time, when the new destroys the old or modernizes it, but basically lots of industries disappear. There's rise and decline of industries, regions, and countries. Jobs and skills are gained and lost. Income polarization, the prosperity of the few, the desperation of the many. From financial creativity to financial casino. And major crashes along the way. But when we come to the deployment period, it's the golden age of creative construction. What does creative construction mean? Means that every single innovation brings more and more innovations upstream and downstream, because the new technology is already the common paradigm, and it is now diffusing comfortably, because that is what everybody understands as progress and as innovation. And that is because there is a proactive state promoting economic and social progress by setting up a win-win game between business and society. Further on, you'll understand better what I mean by that. Production reigns rather than finance, with clear dynamic demand and stable, reliable regulation. Dynamic demand is a very important concept that I will be talking about in a minute. So the turning point is a time of instability and uncertainty, political divisions, recessions, tensions, conflicts, resentment, populism. Do you recognize what we're going through now? That's exactly what I think. I think not only that we are there, but we might be coming to the end, and we might have ahead the golden age. I will talk about it in a minute. Social progress in capitalism requires shaping action by the state, even though many free marketeers will deny it. Income polarization is typical of free market installation periods and major bubble times. So what do we have? Here is the installation period and the turning point of mass production. Then we have deployment, the golden age of mass production. As you can see, this is the income earned by top 1% of taxpayers. It is high in installation periods, and it comes down in deployment. So we went from the top 1% having 20% of income to the bottom 50% getting the 20%. So this is the difference. So you can distinguish in terms of what happens to society, what a golden age is about. And of course, golden age deployment periods are more stable and inequality diminishes. We have three previous golden ages to learn from. The Victorian boom in mid-19th century, the Belle Epoque, progressive era in the US at the beginning of the 20th century, and the post-war golden age in mid-20th century. They are also profoundly different, but their nature is similar. What are golden ages about? They are about the perception and reality. Notice, it's the reality, but also that people feel it, of three advances. Social progress, resulting in social peace, due to the constant improvement of a significant new portion of the population becoming a middle class. It's the feeling that there's a whole, that everybody's sort of moving up in social progress. Economic growth, based on guaranteed and increasing dynamic demand. Dynamic demand, I will explain in a minute. For the core economic sectors with the new technologies. So the core economic sectors face demand that grows with them and on the multiplication of opportunities for business up and downstream, which is what I've called creative construction. Social justice. It's based on increasing rights for a greater proportion of the population and social trust in the fairness of the system. It's a feel-good time. People feel, in fact, the French call the post-war boom le 30 glorieuses, the glorious 30 years, because that's how it felt. Each time the advances have been achieved differently, of course, because they respond to the context, to the conditions left by installation, and to the nature of the paradigm. The issue of dynamic demand is crucial for golden ages. It is not just quantitative, like the Keynesian notion of aggregate demand, nor does it respond to J.B. Say's idea about supply creating its own demand. It doesn't exactly happen like that. It is demand that responds to the nature of the new technologies and grows at the same rhythm as the potential production capacity of the core industries of the technological revolution. So as long as there is increasing productivity, which is what the core industries provide, you can have increasing, you need to have increasing demand, which with whatever conditions will create demand for that particular set of industries that are growing, particularly with the new technologies. And that is enabled by implicit or explicit government policy again. So for the most recent golden age of the mass production revolution after World War II, dynamic demand came from two main directions in the West: suburbanization and the Cold War. The automobile created conditions which were not there before about the possibility of using cheap land, and people had the automobile to come in. So suburbia was a way of everybody having a cheap house on cheap land. So that guaranteed growing markets for mass-produced consumer goods and required, of course, the welfare state and public infrastructure. Whereas the Cold War needed to guarantee demand for military goods and for technological advance, which required public procurement and funding of science. While subsidized agriculture freed consumer demand for manufactured goods. If food was cheap, then you could buy manufactured goods with the rest. It also facilitated markets for farm machinery and petrochemicals. So how did the welfare state manage to intensify mass consumption, creating the good life for the middle class? Well, public infrastructure for suburbia eased construction of affordable homes requiring automobiles and electrical appliances. Public backing for mortgages made banks willing to lend to salaried workers to have mortgages and to have automobiles. Unemployment insurance assured continuity in credit and mortgage payments. Pensions allowed spending salaries without fear of old age. Supporting strong unions made salaries increase with productivity. The unions forced this, which was good for business, but they don't necessarily understand that that is so, and attained free time for leisure, shopping, and consumption. You really need time in order to be able to consume properly. Free education and health provided wages and salaries, made wages and salaries only for mass consumption. They didn't have to pay education and health. Even all the way to university, it was free, not like now. Farm subsidies allowed cheap food, was freed income for other consumption, and decent farm profits enabled using petrochemicals. Don't forget that herbicide, pesticide, all those things were actually also oil derived. All that plus the Marshall Plan for Europe and the World Bank, which funded the road, electrical, and other infrastructure that enabled world demand. So there was also world demand, but the main thing was the national demand of, consumer national demand. Some revolutions thrive in national markets, others are globalizing. So here you can see, this is the post-war boom. This is under 20% of world exports and of GDP was exports and imports. Whereas now and before, we had globalization. So globalized markets actually need world demand, whereas it so happens that mass production, because of its nature, required a lot of local, national, internal demand. So, and that's how, and it's visible how it happened. As soon as this revolution began spreading, internal demand became more important. And now we're on the opposite way. So the first globalization, which was the age of steel and heavy engineering, very much marked by the British Empire and the rise of many countries, the US, Germany, Japan, Sweden, etc. And now, of course, we have had an incredible globalization with China forging ahead and various other countries. And in the middle, we had this international rather than global world order with that age of mass production. So the ICT revolution is globalizing, and it is likely to require supranational arrangements. Right now, it looks impossible, but if we don't have it, it might be very difficult to have a golden age with the globalizing paradigm. So this time, an equivalent but different set of policies and institutions will be required. But now the new dynamic demand must be for capital goods and services, which is in the nature of this fifth revolution. China, however, is making the leap in both revolutions, the mass production and this one. So it must set up the institutions to foster dynamic demand in basic consumer goods and services too. So it needs to get dynamic demand in for the old and for the new. So what would be the road ahead for China and the West? Will it be a global golden age for the information revolution? Well, first of all, we have a problem. Today, China and the West are competing for their own insufficient markets. They have overproduction of things that they cannot consume themselves, and exports are not absorbing yet. It is markets for capital goods and services, metals, especially steel, but high-tech consumer goods, infrastructure projects, green tech, high-tech pharma, etc. Currently, it is a zero-sum game that could lead to extended conflict. Massive new growing markets are required. Friendshoring to favor the development of the global South is one evident way to achieve that. You can stimulate new and sufficient dynamic demand for the advanced countries, East and West. The opportunity is there to develop dynamic demand for all. Global energy, food, and resources for green development, enhancing the purchasing power of the global South, all that dynamic demand for high-level services and capital goods, AI, smart plants, green energy, biotech, microelectronics, new materials, etc., for both China and the West, and at the same time, supporting ample domestic demand for goods and services. All that innovation is open as long as we are helping it to happen. China has stepped ahead with the Belt and Road Initiative and friendshoring investment. The West is beginning to follow, but neither seems to have taken on board the dynamic demand issue as a clear goal. Moving south, consumer goods assembly with lower cost labor plus rental and recycling. We should probably do rental. We can't have everybody in the world, every home in the world to have a refrigerator if we need to have to throw them out like we are doing now. So we need to do rental of long durable products, as well as processing minerals in situ next to the mine rather than doing all this traveling and 6 ships full of dirt rather than, but basically because we have local renewable energy and that would help help climate change not happen so soon. So all this could unleash development in the global South and generate increasing high-tech demand for the North. All countries must also enhance the domestic market for goods and services. That depends on salary levels, on free time to consume, and on the security of the welfare state, so you know you're secure for your old age and so on, including the salaries and the productivity of the services of the welfare state itself, of course, which is a very important part of how you generate consumer demand. The successful welfare state set up by the West for the mass production revolution is no longer adequate, whereas China is broadening its own and experimenting with various forms of adoption. And here, last I talk about AI, AI can play a central role. The good life with mass production was about mass consumption of manufactured goods with waste as a form of market expansion. The good life with information technologies can be about optimal private and public services while protecting the planet. A whole new world of innovation in government and social services, health, education, longevity, food production, sustainability, etc., is ready to be created in all countries with the help of artificial intelligence. Processes of forging ahead to challenge the leader, as that of the United States and Germany surpassing Britain in the third revolution, involve making the leap with two revolutions, modernizing the old with the new one. That is precisely what China has done by upgrading mass production with the information revolution, robotics, and all the rest, and then advancing at the new frontier. Now, regarding the welfare state, it must also do both. It has been catching up and can now forge ahead, reaching towards the affordability of a new good green life for all, while guaranteeing dynamic consumer demand for producers. For the West, bringing the welfare state up to date is an emergency to overcome social unrest and confront populism. For China, establishing a universal welfare state is an essential complement of the successful forging ahead process. For all, it is an immense innovation opportunity. A peaceful global golden age is possible with social progress, economic growth, and social justice in North, South, East, and West, in a safe and healthy planet. To get there, history is a useful guide. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carlota. So I really enjoy your talk. It's like listening to music, and you give us really deep understanding of history, and you are also very optimistic. Give us a lot of hope. And I think when listening to you, as a lot of things echoing to me with what's happening right now at the national level, at the firm level. Many issues, including, for example, right now, the geopolitical tensions, and actually also talk about the styles. Actually, in the past year or so, actually, the trade between China and the US has gone down quite a bit, but China's trade with a lot of other countries has gone up quite a bit. So China is keeping its exports. And I talked to a lot of companies that are really going to the south to the many of the markets. And so also a lot of issues that things happening at the firm level. Anyway, I think there are three type of questions uh, that arises after I listening to you. The first type is the nature of AI. So how can we decide something is really a technological, it's a revolution? Can we decide right now AI is such a one or not? You already, I think you concluded, but I'm not sure whether it is. That's the first question. The second type of questions, and you are optimistic about how AI will bring, but I think a lot of people are worried that we're not even sure that AI will bring a booming middle class as we have wished. Will this happen? A lot of people are worried about the job. If you look at the big companies, they are actually they're shedding the jobs for humans. So how can we be sure this will be very inclusive? That's, I guess, the second type of questions. The third type of questions, what can we learn from this? And I think you already gave many recommendations. But for example, we'll talk about globally the landscape, but how about Europe? A continent with a lot of history of capturing technology, but what can you do? Also, it seems to me that you are implying that the government should play a much more proactive role in this. Otherwise, it's not going to go naturally to where we wish. Some of these are many of the questions, but I think I would like, for the interest of time, I would like to probably leave this at the end of the when we discuss. I would like to invite you back to answer those questions. For now, probably let's first move on to the second speaker, Professor Brian Arthur. And actually, Carlota and and Brian are the two people in my mind. I have very limited knowledge, but in my mind, they are the two best technological historians who understand and remembers the historical lessons. And so we are really honored today to have these two to kick off the talk. And so Brian doesn't need much um, introduction. His topic is some general considerations about AI and the economy. And as Brian famously talked about before, that he thinks the economy it's a it's a representation of the technology or the realization of technology. So he has uh, gave us a lot of lessons, and he is a founding member and external professor at the Santa Fe Institute. Anyway, I think Brown is famous for many things. He doesn't need us to bring to. He has a very long introduction. I will save the time. Let Brown to talk about his views. Brown, the floor is yours.
Okay. I hope you can hear me.
Good.
Can you hear me? Okay. Uh, and is my screen being shared as well? Can you see my screen? Okay. Thank you very much, Long, for the introduction. I'm delighted to be here. It's a little bit early in the morning. I'm, I'm not totally awake yet. It's 5, 6 a.m. here in California. Um, I What I want to do. I thought that was a great talk, by the way. I'll say more in a moment. What I want to do is give some background. Again, this will be historical, slightly different view of history, and I want to go a bit further back even than Carlota went. Um, but I want to lay out a context and zero in more on AI itself. Um, the first thing I want to say is that I'm a huge fan and learned an enormous amount from Carlota Perez's book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital. Um, I learned more from Carlota's work than I did in all the theoretical economics classes I took at UC Berkeley. So thank you. And I'm delighted she's here this morning and other people as well. But thank you indeed, Carlota. Wonderful. What I want to talk about is slightly different. Um, I want to talk about the story of what's going on, not so much productivity, GDP, things like that, or exports or anything. I just want to talk about zero in on the technology itself. My background, I would hastily point out, is that I'm an engineer trained, and Naki knows this sort of thing. I'm very much interested in technology. What fascinates me about technological revolutions is that at any moment during the at any moment in any economy, I tend to believe there's an overall story. And if you look at the United States in 1860, It wasn't a very impressive economy. It's just before the American Civil War. It's certainly smaller than China's economy. The US economy in 1860 was about the size of Italy's, which in 1860 wasn't a very large economy at all. 40 years later, the United States economy was the largest in the world. Somebody asked Josef Schumpeter, great Austrian economist, what had happened. And Schumpeter just had one word: the railways. They connected the two sides of the continent. Similar things happened in Canada. And all the production, all the agricultural production of the day that was in the middle could be transported to either side, and suddenly there was a unified economy. I don't want to oversimplify here. What I want to emphasize is that one technology can dominate for a particular set of decades and make enormous transformations in an economy. And we've just heard a very good theoretical set of ideas for that from Carlota. Obviously, at the moment, what we have is what I call the digital revolution, or the ICT revolution. And that's been going on certainly in nascent form since the 1960s, 1970s. I've lived through most of it, and I'm sitting here this morning in the middle of Silicon Valley, so I've watched it up close. An interesting thing about the digital revolution is that it keeps morphing. It's not one story dominating. It might be mainframe computers, and then maybe in the 1980s, personal computation. And then the 90s, everything got connected, and we had the internet, and then web services. And then by about 2010, there was the cloud, and the coming of serious AI. And then now we're in the middle of AI as the dominating story in the 2020s. It's not that other things aren't going on, but there's one story really that's dominating and changing things. And that morphing that digital revolution keeps doing, I often think is very much like a dream. You don't quite understand what's going on in a dream, speak for myself, but the scene keeps shifting and changing, and you're trying to make sense out of it, and then it shifts and changes again. So the digital revolution keeps morphing. I want to zero in on one part of it, and that is artificial intelligence. I put a picture here of John McCarthy. I once met him at Stanford. John McCarthy, in 1956, coined the phrase artificial intelligence, a famous meeting with other people. He wasn't the only one. When I met him at Stanford, I was led into a series of antechambers, and then there was a further room, and then there was something that looked like a dark cave, and there was an opening, and at the end of that dark cave there was a green glow, and sitting in front of a green computer, this would have been the 1980s, was John McCarthy. And he looked for all the world like something out of Lord of the Rings. I don't want to minimize this. I've got great affection for these pioneers, but the scene very much remains in my mind of this green room, John McCarthy, lit only by the glow of an early computer. Very glad I met him. So I want to talk about AI. I think artificial intelligence so far has come in two phases. The first phase everybody knows about. I call it the deep learning phase. There's plenty of stuff happened before this, but I'd say this is roughly from about 2006. on through to today, we got something that the sort of intelligence, the deep learning, that's neural nets symbolized on the left here, brought us something I would call associative intelligence. By the way, when we got serious intelligence, this sort of intelligence, here in the Silicon Valley, at least academically, we were all surprised and shocked. Oh my God, AI works after all. It can do stuff after all. It's not just an academic pipe dream. Wow. So what does this phase of artificial intelligence do? It makes associations. You can show it a face image on an airport, just pixels, and it can tell exactly what person that is. It's associating an image with a particular name. You can show it a sentence or give it a sentence in Mandarin, and it can render that into English. Again, it's associating. You give me the sentence, I associate that with a sentence in English, or vice versa. You can speak to it. So your voice is on audio. All you have is certain vibrations going up and down. It can associate that if you're calling into a bank with a particular customer, etc. You can associate a computer image, say you're in a driverless car, with some particular object, which might be a road or pedestrians or bicycles or something else. So these associations, I would say, are very much what uh, our quick thinking part of our mind does. And this was, I think, an enormous set of breakthroughs. And as I say, we were all kind of taken aback, going, oh, we can do that? Wow. This came about over a series of years, 10 years or more, and there's much more to associative intelligence. Now we've got what's called generative AI, Gen AI, whatever you want to call it, large language models, transformer models, etc. What sort of intelligence does that bring us? I think, and this is not very deep observation, generative AI generates. It brings us what I would call constructive intelligence. When that arrived on the scene big time in 2022, we were all were similarly shocked. Oh my God, you can now generate stuff. And this was, I think, quite something that happened. So generative AI constructs solutions. You give it a series of prompts. I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but you give it a series of specifications or prompts, tell it what you want. It will construct some solution from components it's picked up and that are at hand. Um, Again, I don't need to go into this for anyone here watching. The components are gathered from texts or the web or images or whatever. And this type of solution type of AI, given the right prompts, is putting together some organized set of components, much as if you ask me to give a legal argument, I'm not a lawyer, I will put together components to make an argument or a brief. So we're in an age where we can suddenly construct. Again, this is stuff everyone here knows, but I'm just pointing out that if you want to construct financial derivatives or financial solutions, if you're in commercial banking where you're looking for complicated solutions, AI is starting to do this, complicated contracts and computational applications, not just writing programs, but maybe directing things and designing control systems that can take care of things, intelligent design itself. And my favorite is what I would call autonomous self-organizing systems. I can see Naki smiling here. This is, we're in the systems analysis world, but I'll just give you um, one thing. How would you design an autonomous air traffic control system? That would be a self-organizing system. There might be no central computer, just aircraft talking to each other in some generative AI way, and everything at the macro level, planes taking off and landing is well organized. So AI is starting to do all these things. It's not just designing buildings. Pretty soon it will be designing and constructing buildings as well. Anyway, how should we think of this technology? And that's what I've been pondering. Everybody's been asking this question. What I want to point out is that there is a historical precedent. And that historical precedent, for me, one of the great historical precedents, that's the printing revolution. Roughly, that would be about 1450 to 1600. Printing revolution never really stopped. And it's, as Carlota pointed out, that sort of revolution began in Germany, spread quickly through Europe to Italy and Amsterdam, Venice and Amsterdam, and then went abroad. Some countries didn't adopt this until the 19th century. Some countries that I think of as extremely sophisticated, the Arab ones, for example, and I think they lost out for a few hundred years. I'd also point out that the printing revolution started around about 1450 in Germany, but China had printing 600 years before that, and China had paper making as well. China had all the components of this, but it was less convenient. In printing in the West, you're resetting 26 characters or whatever, and a few other things. In China, you'd have to have possibly 3,000 characters or something similar. It wasn't so practical and didn't take off there, but it sure took off in Europe. I want to point out at this stage, I'll come back to printing in a moment, but I think there's two aspects of the technology. One is, you could say, what does a technology do to GDP, productivity? What's it doing to jobs? So if you say the year is 1500 or 1550, we have printing, we can now print books. What's that done to GDP? The answer would be not that much. There might be printers in Venice or in Mainz in Germany. There might be more productivity. You don't have to use all those scribes to copy books by hand. Maybe there's a few jobs in bookstores and things like that. But it's not something you would point to as having totally revolutionized things. On the other hand, and I think this distinction is elementary but overlooked, any new tech, not every new technology, but most important technologies, when they come along, they act as an enabler for some new set of activities. They act as a container for new activities, or if you like, they open up a new world. Whereas humans, we can do new things that we hadn't done before. And this distinction, as I say, is elementary, but it's not usually pointed out. I go to conference after conference, and people ask, what about digital this or that? What about AI? And somebody points out, well, it's not making much change in productivity. Why should it? But maybe it's opening a new world. What new world did printing open up? Oh, limited number of bookstores, but my God, did this change the world. Information became public. Before the printing revolution, if you wanted access to knowledge, you had to befriend an abbot in a local monastery. You had to go there. Books were brought, those were chained to a desk so you couldn't run off with them. There might be monks hovering, this might be in 1300, and you might be able to limitedly copy some if nobody was looking, etc. Once we had books, once we had manuscripts and pamphlets, knowledge or information could be held individually. I could have them in a room I call a library. They could be perused, you could look at them, you could think about them, you could debate the ideas with your friends, and above all, you could build on these ideas. So what was enabled by the printing revolution was an enormous rise in individual thought. Individual people, not just the church or philosophers who belong to the church, could have thoughts. You could have thoughts yourself privately. And here are some examples. This is Martin Luther, probably around 1520 or so. He had a lot of individual thoughts, again in Germany, in Wittenberg, and printed around 2 million pamphlets. He had other theological ideas than standard ones. Those ideas went out there, became successful. It's called the Protestant Revolution, and had many different facets or downstream in over the next 2 or 3 centuries. And this wasn't all roses. It was not all what you might call a cup of tea or a picnic. It led in Europe to about 150 or 200 years of warfare. These were individual ideas motivating armies to go to war against individual ideas motivating other armies. I'm from Northern Ireland, from Belfast, and I can attest that such warfare lasted up until the year 2000. It's still going on to some degree. So this was a powerful set of ideas. I'm focusing here on what was enabled by the technology, not the technology or many booksellers there were. Similarly, this is Nicholas Copernicus, early scientist. That picture there's from about 1543 or so. Believed that had managed to prove to his own satisfaction, using printed material, that the sun was at the center of our universe. Published this, or this was published 2 or 3 days after he died. He's a member of the Catholic Church, couldn't afford to rock the boat too much, so he conveniently died, and then his ideas were published. I sometimes think that's not a bad strategy. But what I'm pointing out here is that modern science came along, and modern science in turn led to modern technology. This is a picture of the detector system in CERN, the nuclear particle facility in Switzerland. So this is a complicated set of technologies. All of this, it came from printing and printing books and perusing and discussing, and led to the rise of science, individual ideas, and to exchange of knowledge and technology. So it's not just books that are getting exported or getting put in the back of horses and taken home. These are real ideas, and they all date back to the exchange of individual information. So I want to come back then to what generative AI, what sort of world is this bringing us? And my rather annoying answer is that we don't know. But I would say very loosely, we now have the ability not just to associate faces with names or associate pixels with obstructions in the road for driverless cars. We now have the ability to automatically design, to construct, to create novel methods, novel institutions. We can create autonomous systems, meaning systems that don't have human beings particularly involved at all. So I want to just pause there for a moment and point out a couple of things about this. There's no limit to this. If you can construct from an alphabet or from a dictionary of words, be that in Chinese or in English or German or anything, you can construct sentences and ideas without limit. On Humboldt, I think 1830 something, pointed out that language is the infinite use of finite means. So you can construct and construct from those constructions and construct from constructions made from those constructions, be that in art, in music, in architecture, in industrial design, in institutions. We are in a brave new world. And that's bringing us what I'd call a novel world or novel arrangements. And it's a world we cannot foresee. I want to point out very quickly, and I say this with some glee, if we cannot foresee the world that's coming, we can't plan. And I think part of the upheaval that's going on at the moment, upheaval all over the world, is that we don't know what the bleep is coming. We have no idea what's coming down the road in 5 or 10 years' time, whether we'll still have jobs or what sort of world we're heading to. And I think we're a little bit unseated or unsettled because of that. But I'd like to point out with some glee the standard rationality doesn't work in a world that you can't describe, because standard rationality means that you're trying to resolve or solve or deal with a problem that's well defined, and a world that we can't foresee in 10 years' time, 5 years' time, 50 years' time is not well defined. What do? And go back to a very famous Chinese saying that we learned in the West in the 1980s. I think it was from Dang. Um, Crossing the river, we cross the river by feeling the stones. You have to sort of make your own way across the river, put your feet out and say, okay, I can get this bit, I can get that bit. We're in a new world. Last thing I want to point out is that for this novel world of novel arrangements, I think it's not so much that we need policies, we certainly do. We need whole countries, China's one of them, leading the way. We need Europe maybe waking up a bit better and becoming part of the leadership. We need AI, where I'm sitting in Silicon Valley, to be developed. I'm all for what's happening, not completely all for, I suppose, but what's happening is extraordinarily useful and extraordinarily interesting and possibly very good. But I do think we need some thoughtfulness about the whole thing. And I would put it this way. I think we stepped onto a bus and we don't know where the bus is heading. When I was a child, you could take a bus tour. It was called a mystery tour. And you'd get on the bus and if you were on vacation, it would take you somewhere to some town or maybe into the mountains, and you didn't know where it was going. And that was exciting and interesting. So we're now on a bus and we don't know where it is going. Lastly, I think that as humans, we don't need, of course, we need food and shelter. Of course, we need comfort. We need longevity. We need better health, etc. But I think beyond that, or even deeper than that, as human beings, we need challenge. We need a certain degree of autonomy. In other words, I don't want to be told what to do by some computer or some algorithm all my days. I'd like to have feeling that I'm able to do something. And as humans, we need challenge, not just climbing mountains, but we need the challenge of trying to make things work in our own way. It's not just about happiness. I think life is about meeting challenges and the satisfaction that comes from that. And that's not always very secure. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the other speakers here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. Just now we talk about Carlota's book, and but also Brian has another book, which is I think that the English title is the Nature of Technology, and I think that is the best book to talk about the nature of technology I've ever read. And I think in combination, we should read Brian's book about the nature of technology, and we should read Carlota's book on how technology should be integrated into the economy, changing our lives. So I think those two books has a lot of wisdom. Now, let me first make a quick comment. I think probably partly Brian was answering the question I was posting to Carlota. I was asking her whether how can we judge AI, is it a technological revolution or not? Now, I think Brian was suggesting it is. It is actually part of the digital revolution. So that is several wave of the digital revolution together. That is transformational. I think that partly answers the question. And I also like um, I also like your talk about the printing, the limitation of its impact of printing on the economy. And from sometimes I would like to bring up the another angle. I would like to talk about from the economy and the business point of view because they are technology in
Mhm.
Brian's definition of what is technology. Technology is a useful combination of the factors that can achieve goals. Then obviously economy or business is part of the technology. But I think the most important technology of the business is to connecting supply and demand, especially including the demand of dynamic demand, as Carlota emphasized. So I think printing doesn't enable enough of the technology that combines the supplies demand. So that's why it has very uh, uh, limited impact. But now we can see that it can be used as computing, as a connector, as the internet, and now as the a thinker, and so all those things. But so I think that I really like your point. But I have a question here. So basically, I was hoping that Brian, that you could somehow answer the question that I've imposed of the theme of this talk. That is the how can we more effectively combine those factors, help the different countries, organizations to embrace the technology. But you are telling us you do make a very important observation. That is, it should be an enabler. But now you conclude with the conclusion that we are on the bus, but we do not know how to drive. That is not as responsible as we hope you can be. And I think we all have to answer. We have to to deal with this uncertainty, we have to drive this thing better. It's necessary. So, and you see, Carlota has already made a lot of bold predictions, but you are withdrawing back a bit. I'm hoping that we can connect this better, and I hope you can give us more recommendations in the end.
Can I
But
say
let
one?
me,
Oh, okay. I'll,
yes, go ahead, go ahead.
You asked me a sort of so what? How does this AI technology make its way into the world? What other technologies would enable that? That's the theme of this particular dialogue. Just very quickly, I would say that I don't think the economy adopts technologies. It's not quite the right language for me. It's not wrong. I would simply say that all the businesses in commerce in any country encounter, not adopt, but encounter the new possibilities. It's like you ran into them in the street. You encounter AI, and then you take what you do, it could be medical surgery, and you put that together with the new possibilities, and you might create very new things. So there's where in a I don't want to project too much onto Carlota's thoughts, but I would say we're in a time, uh, if we are moving into this golden age of where AI helps a lot, it's because it's as different businesses, transportation, navigation, surgery, as they encounter this technology, they'll be incorporating it within their own world. And that will give rise to new sub-technologies as they do that. Thank you.
Yeah. So my understanding is that you're a bit more like the God's view that it will happen at encounters. We're going to gradually find a solution, but we're hoping that you can guide a bit more how we can do this better. Anyway, so that's the theme
Thank
of
you.
today's challenge, and let's move on for now to the third speaker, Professor Hongjiang Zhang, and so. Hongjiang is a foreign member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering and a venture partner of the Source Code Capital. So he is a globally recognized leader in artificial intelligence and multimedia computing, and he has held senior executive and scientific leadership roles across industry and academia. So anyways, he has many. So I think he can today would like him to offer his insight from technology experts' perspective on the nature of AI as transformational technology and how we can embrace this technology better. What is exactly different about AI and how can we embrace this better? That's the key, and he's really the expert on AI. So, Hongjiang, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Long, and it's really my honor to join the panel of distinguished economists. So, as someone who has been working in the AI for the last 30 years, I would like to share my recent observation on the new development of AI models, specifically the models that are released in the last 3 weeks from two leaders, leading companies in this field. And so I'll cover most on the technical issues. Then I will touch on the impact of this new development on the economy and on the future society. But first, let's look at the two pieces of news that happened in the last 3 weeks. First one is the Gemini 3 that was released about 3 weeks ago. It's really opened a new era for the LLM or for large AI models. And let me quote Demis, who is the CEO of DeepMind, say that it is the best model in the world for multi-model understanding and powerful agentic and vibe coding. All built on the foundation of state-of-art of reasoning. I would like you to remember those keywords: the multi-model, agentic, vibe coding, and reasoning. So here we don't see many words on pre-training, but later on we'll come back to that. But one thing I do want to point out, the Gemini 3, it's rated as it has the multi-model reasoning capability with a PhD level intelligence, and it also has so much advanced feature on 2Us. Those are all key features for agentic AI, which is what we talk so much lately. And here we can have a quick look on the benchmark performance numbers. We don't have to get into this, and those you can get it on the web. But really, you look through them. It actually across the board, the performance on all the benchmarks have surpassed all the existing model. Basically state of art with a large margin, sometimes doubled. So that shows this is a significant improvement and significant progress. And this is the first time people also realize Gemini model is good, if not much better than all the existing models, including GPT 5.1. And there is one particular version of Gemini 3, which is the Deep Sync, which is the reasoning model and has a strong, very, very strong agentic capability. Just look at the three benchmarks. It's about it's better than all other models, and it's including the Gemini 3 Pro. But this emphasizes so much on deep thinking, and it's emphasized on its reasoning capability. And if we look at this chart, just illustrate in this particular what we call the humans lost challenge exam. And you can see that the Gemini DeepThink, that performance is more than double of other models, other existing models. Of course, if you look at the cost of of this particular model when we come to ask it to perform a given task, the cost is also more than double. Is actually 10 times, if not 100 times higher than the other models. So it has a much strong capability, and of course it will also require much bigger resource. So let's move to a second piece of news, which is released about a week ago, and here we see the latest model from DeepSeek, which is there are 3.2 the model that is a really beautiful agent. So again, it's agentic focus on agentic capability, and if you read its tech report, it says this is a model with superior reasoning and agent performance. Again, it's focusing on reasoning and agentic performance. And here we want to point out two other key points. One is this particular model, the performance is a result of scaling post-training compute. It's a result of scalable agentic post-training. So here, if you look at the numbers, it's all come to close to the state of art. Why it's important the model is only come close to the best model, but it's still significant. I'll come back to that because the one key element of its significance is actually the cost efficiency in achieving those performances. So now I briefly mentioned the two pieces of news, basically two latest release of AI models. That's represent the state of art. And there are few observations I'd like to share with you. And number one is people have been questioning, is the scaling law, has the scaling law hit a wall? Is the scaling law still effective? Well, those two models those two releases of the latest model actually answer this question very positively, meaning that we are still far from hitting a wall. What exactly is the scaling law? Well, this is the essence of LLM. That is the emergent abilities from scale. When you scale the data size, when you scale the training, when you scale the model size, performance improve exponentially. And it reached to a turning point. We call it the point of emergent capability that appears. So that explains why with our model it becomes bigger, more powerful, consume more electricity, consume more data. Okay, that's the essence of pre-training. And people start to worry that pre-training has hit a wall. But let me quote the two tech leaders of these two models, Gemini 3 and DeepSeek 3.2, v3.2. And the Oriel, who is the tech lead for Gemini 3, basically says that contrary to the popular belief that scaling law is over, and the team has delivered a drastic jump. And this data actually shows that pre-training has a long way to go. Not only that, post-training is still a total greenfield. And similarly, if you look at what claimed by DeepSeek, it emphasizes that computational budget is actually a limiting factor. If they could get more computing power, their reasoning model could go even further. So what they say is that because fewer total training flops, their model is still behind the leading close models. DeepSeek is an open source model, and they are going to scale compute. And of course, that will scale data as well, and to make their future model much more, much stronger. So, following those two pieces of news, two releases, they are OpenAI's research chief also had an interview and made it very clear, scaling law is not dead. It's still strong, and a much stronger model has emerged after they resumed pre-training. So what I want to say here is, this particular curve, again, being proved by the latest development in the AI models. That is, not only pre-training scaling law continues, but also we see a new scaling law, which is the reasoning model, the post-training scaling law, just started. And in the future, when we look into memory, we look at the context, when we look at new agentic capabilities, we feel we're going to see new scaling laws and not only in the post trading stage, but definitely in the reasoning stage, and especially when we think about future agentic capabilities. Scaling law will continue, if not only in the pre-training curve, but definitely more in the post-training, in the reasoning, in the agentic stage. So the one thing that could limit the scaling, apart from the factor we all know is energy consumption, is the lack of training data. That is a bottleneck. And so number two observation, that is the question, will AI's industrial scaling up continues? Here we really talk about huge investment into CapEx. That if we notice what those super scalers, those Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, Meta, OpenAI, how much dollars they put into CapEx, which means really data centers, computer centers, in 2025, in this particular year, and what they're going to continue putting in 2026 and all the way to 2028. We're seeing that this year the capex is over $1 trillion, and projected. Then by 2028, we're talking about those superscalers is going to bring online 5 gigawatt scale training clusters. So, and if we continue this trend, and then we are actually going to hit the problem of power shortage, and that is real, and that's that's where we have heard so much talk lately on when people compare China and the U.S. Well, U.S. are leading in technology breakthroughs. When we talk about energy, talk about electricity, China has progressed much faster than the States. So the question is this projection going to continue? But if we believe the scaling law is going to continue, this projection is going to continue. So we are going to face energy shortage, at least in the States. And what's the reason behind that? The two previous speakers already talked about. This is really a new revolution. And if we only focus on information revolution and think about the past 4 waves, the mainstream computer, the PC computer, and the web internet, and the mobile internet. Talk about those 3 waves. Every wave, about 10 to 15 years, and they brought in a new set of platforms and come with it new infrastructure and new ecosystem. And of course, the tons of investment. But there should be no difference. There should be no difference for this wave of tech revolution, which is generative AI. And it's really a new inflection point. What I'm saying, what I'm challenging everyone to think about, this is not just another wave, in information technology only. It's actually a revolution that can be comparable itself to industrial revolution. And so it's not just another wave, we see the curve goes up. It could be the curve goes up much sharper. So it is, in my view, the most profound technology, and it's something that can compare to fire and electricity. So that will call for a total new build-up of infrastructure, like what we did, what the U.S. did when they started build a railroad, 150 years ago, like what we did, 25 years ago for the internet. And this, if we compare the total infrastructure capex we have invested in, we're going to invest in, and we talk about 1.2%. But if you think about, we are building a total new infrastructure, new digital infrastructure for next 10 years, next 20 years, or next 50 years. And this is not a huge investment. If you would look at the scale, look at the impact, the fundamental impact that we're going to see in the coming years. So also, if we look at today, if we look at the last 2 years and look at the last 12 months, the last 6 months, well, people worry about a bubble in capex investment, and what we see is the demand has far exceeded supply, and all the AI companies, they don't have enough GPUs to provide to their users, to their own researchers, to their own engineers who are training large models, who are provide AI services to their customers. So demand is there, and if that is today, but if we look into the future, if we look at the history, we know what we are. If we believe we are building a new digital infrastructure, our investment today are far from bubble. So the other observation I would like to share with you is the turnaround of Google models of the Gemini 3, and it's a factor that it was trained on their own TPU, on their own chips, not on NVIDIA's GPUs. That could be a beginning of a new ecosystem. If we look at an AI model ecosystem, so we have this, companies that provide models. So they will provide model as a service, and really in the future, a model itself will become part of the platform. And beneath that, in the the very foundation is the computer hardware, which is the chips, which in this case is GPUs. And on top of that is a cloud platform. But if we look at the past 5 years, all the money, all the profit actually, gone to one company, which is NVIDIA. So, but the question is this going to change with the release of Google's Gemini 3 and the fact that it's trained on its own TPU? So if we look at the left side, which is the foundation of today's AI model ecosystem, so it's all based on a GPU from NVIDIA. So GPU has a huge margin, and so that NVIDIA made a lot of profit. But then the GPU is more efficient because it really is made for AI, for AI training and for reasoning. So you could see the pricing could come down, and not to mention the fact that it is more efficient when it comes to training, and definitely in the future in the reasoning. So we are seeing a end-to-end, a closed ecosystem that start emerge, especially if you look at all other product that Google offers. So it has AI application, and it has all the existing applications that would be powered by AI. Not to mention in the future, they could come out with AI native apps. But even the existing apps that will be powered or has been powered with their models, that itself is already powerful. And then think about the model itself and the TPU that come with it. So that's more like a closed ecosystem emerging. So in the sense, we already see a kind of open ecosystem, which has the NVIDIA GPU at the center. So that was more like an Android system, and more like in the PC time, the Wintel system. But now you have a emerging, end-to-end system that will be more like iOS and Apple's iOS system in the mobile internet time. So, well, which one will win? Oh, in the future, we're going to have two ecosystems, like what we have observed, have experienced in the mobile internet age, in the web internet age. So that's a question. And the other observation, and actually with more confirmation for me, I would like to share is the tech development path that I have always been promoting. That is the AI models, the AI technology is going to go through this path. That is from pre-training to the post-training, which is reinforcement learning, and to reasoning model, and to agentic AI. So basically, if you look at what user will have, you have the base model, then you go to reasoning model, then now you have agentic inference engine. So in the sense that the base model, which is the pre-training model, is more like the fast thinking in our brain. So that's system one, but really the most powerful one is the system two, that is, what we call slow thinking, but really more sophisticated thinking. And also, when we come to reasoning model, when we come to reinforcement learning, when we come to agentic inference, we are also moving from static machine learning, which is pre-training only, to adaptive machine learning, which will gradually provide the capability to learn from experiences, to continuously adapt to and improve the performance. One particular, approach, the training approach I really like and want to share here is, what has been promoted in the reinforcement learning field. That is, you don't teach, you incentivize. In Chinese we say, 授人以鱼不如授人以渔, which is, giving a man a fish is not as good as teaching him to fish. But, reinforcement learning and reasoning model, agentic inference model, we want to go one step further. That is, not only we teach him how to fish, we go further. We teach him the taste of fish. Now we make him hungry. We basically motivate the model to learn. That's the key progress that we are seeing in training our future models. So I mentioned several times about reinforcement learning. So in the past, when we talk about scaling law, we really talk about pre-training, training-based model. But in post-training and in reasoning model training, really talk about reinforcement learning. So today, we are GPT-4 or GPT-5 or Gemini 3. A lot of part of it is focus on pre-training. So pre-training is a large part of training process and in terms of data usage and in terms of computing power. And reinforcement learning and post-training is more part of it. But that has changed since GPT-5 it definitely has changed with Gemini 3 and with DeepSeek's v3.2. That is, reinforcement learning become much bigger part of the entire model training. And the projection is going to be much larger than pre-training itself. So post-training of the reinforcement training is going to be much bigger part of it. Think about this. That is, it's not too difficult to understand that once you have the base model, you basically have a very strong knowledge model. And based on that, you want to adapt to different tasks. That is post-training. And that itself, it's like, when after we graduate with with undergraduate degree, really we want to get into practice. There are a lot more learning we should do. So that's reinforcement learning. So following this line, we already shift from scaling base model to scaling reasoning to agentic inference. So if that's that entire turning started from O1 model, which was released by OpenAI a year ago in September 2024. And ever since then, we see reasoning model has progressed so fast. And as of today, if we look at the token consumption from October, from September, the token consumption of post-training or reasoning model has surpassed base model. That's a significant turning point. That is to say that reasoning become or performing a certain reasoning task become much bigger part of the model use, and it's going to continue that trend. So then it come to what I mentioned earlier, but I want to talk here more, is scaling agent or scaling reasoning model. It has a long way to go, and it's progress so fast. Really here, we talk about scaling, we talk about the capability of thinking, of performing a task in a longer term, long time period. Basically, you can think for a longer time. That's the thinking capability. And we already observed that the length of thinking of task is as a measure, using that, it's a measure of agent capability. That capability has been doubled every 7 months. You think about that.
Sorry, Hongjiang, I hate to stop you, but you have 2 more minutes.
Yeah. So and then we have also seen this this trend that the boundary between model and agent, that we think in the traditional we tend to think that agent is a tool to use model, but that boundary has been blurred as model itself becomes so important, powerful, and performing so much task in terms of agent inference. Okay, so given the progress, given the rapid improvement of AI models capability, we are enter into, we view AI as a tool to now we view AI as an assistant, and to future we're going to see AI as our partner. So agent is going to take over the workflow of enterprises, and initially we will see human design agent to replace existing workflow, but in the future we will see design of workflow around agent. So that will lead to what I see the agent economy. So the entire economy will be run, and in the past it is run by organizations, by humans, but in the future is still going to run by organizations, but by organizations of agent. So those agents will form a network, just like today's neural network, and that will become the essence of economy. We call it the agent economy. And so if we look at the model today, we see it, especially pre-training model, we basically look at look at them for answers. But in the future, we look at those models for to perform complex tasks. That's where we're going. And so think about the future enterprises. Today, when the enterprise is doing very successful, and we want to expand its revenue, scale. What do? We hire more people. In the future, what are we going to do? We basically buy more GPUs. We enhance our models, and we create more data. We train more powerful agent, and those agents will scale up the business of this particular company, and that's what I call agent economy. Then the question is, at the agentic AI age, how could enterprises keep its competitive edge? Of course, you need to have computing power. You need to have
Hongjiang, the last
powerful
minute.
data. You need to have more powerful model. But the essence here is you have to have your own foundation model that captures the firm's tacit knowledge. That's the only advantage you would have, because otherwise, all the general foundation models has captured all world's knowledge, can reason very efficiently. How do you get your today's data, enterprise analogy into your own proprietary foundation model? That's the challenge. But that's the challenge a company has to take moving into agentic economy. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for overrun.
Thank you, Hongjiang. I really hate to stop you because as a close follower of the AI progress, I know how insightful your speech is. But given the time, anyway, so let me first make a quick comment that I think Hongjiang firstly provided two versions how different countries, the companies, how deal with AI. The US version, what the Google just provided, and DeepSeek has a Chinese version, which is not as good, but much cheaper, much more cost efficient. Then he gave us some great news. The great news is that the scaling law is far from over, and so there's much more progress of AI. That means a lot of the demand, real demand for the computing power, and he also suggested that strategically countries and companies should overinvest, basically, and we should think about energy issues. And he gave us a great insight about the future of the agentic economy. But then in the end, I'm going to impose this question to Hongjiang. We can think about this in the end. It doesn't make us feel, on the one hand, we are really excited, but on the other hand, we are not. It looks more gloomy because it looks a bit far from what Carlota has visioned, that it's going to have a rising middle class, stuff like that. And it's not clear we are closing the gap with the rise of the agents, robots. Anyway, we don't have a good conclusion yet, but that's the reality. Now we're going to have a slight switch of the schedule. The next speaker will be Professor Diane Coyle, and Diane is the Burnett Professor of Public Policy at University of Cambridge and the Research Director of the Burnett Institute for Public Policy. Her research focuses on productivity, the digital economy, and AI policy. She has played a central role in shaping the UK's and Europe's approaches to AI governance, digital competition, and technological regulation. And she's been serving on numerous expert panels and advisory bodies. And today we invite her to talk about, share her insight on why different countries, some countries are more successful than some others in embracing the AI technology, and what should we do? So Diane, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation to take part today among such a distinguished company. So I'm going to talk about, actually it follows on very nicely from the previous talk by Hongjiang, about what is it that makes a country ready, capable of using AI to increase productivity. And I thought I'd start by looking at some figures on how much different countries are using AI already. And the short answer is we don't really know. So here's one example from Microsoft research showing that there's a positive correlation between GDP and AI use. Other data suggests that the tech sector are clearly the biggest users already. All of this is based on surveys that typically cover the extensive margin of use, so not how intensively are people using the technology within activities, but are they using it or not? And this is somewhat puzzling if you look at the United States, perhaps, that it doesn't seem to be as high in the user share as you might expect. Different data from Anthropic about the use of Claude suggests that the US is way ahead in its use. So for these kinds of surveys, there's clearly an issue about the sampling frame that's being used. And what is it being used for? Well, we don't know that either. Often AI is being bundled with standard services like Copilot with Microsoft. It's being embedded in devices, so people might not know that they're using it when they're responding to surveys. The chart at the bottom here is from the Stanford Annual AI Index report showing how many medical devices have been approved by the AI medical devices have been approved by the FDA. So that's increasing extremely rapidly. The other panel suggests, looks at different geographies, and it suggests much higher usage rates than the first chart that I showed you. So there's been a big increase between 2023 and 24, but the figures here, the 70%, the 80%, they're much higher than on the previous chart. And again, we don't know what organizations are using the AI to do. And so we're in a bit of a statistical fog, although more surveys are coming out all the time. I think the one thing we can say for sure is that usage is increasing, but what it's being used for matters a lot for the productivity impacts. And so just to step back, we often think about the models, or we think about gadgets like smartphones when we're thinking about the impacts of technology, but it's process innovations that are the main drivers of productivity growth over time. This table comes from my recent book, and it just lists some of the major process changes over time through the 19th and 20th centuries that led to, across the economy, quite significant increases in productivity growth. And, so for example, the original digital spread led to production networks, the way that production was divided across supply chains, across geographies, an increasing specialization. So Adam Smith's division of labor and specialization being taken one step further by those kinds of technologies. So the question for me now is, what kinds of process innovation might AI enable, and what will the capabilities to enable that need to be? And this is an illustration of the complementary investments that need to be made. And for people who know the Paul David article that this refers to about the spread of electrification, this will be very familiar. But the argument he made in this classic article was that it took 50 years for the productivity gains from electrification to be manifest throughout the economy. The picture on the left is a steam-powered cotton mill in the north of England, and these are built around large steam engines which have a shaft that goes through all the different floors of the mill and drives machines that are clustered around that central shaft. The ability to put an electric dynamo on each piece of equipment meant that the assembly line could be invented. The flow of production could then change to a more logical structure, enabling division of labor within the factory. But that required building new plants, and the image on the right is the original Ford plant, and you can see it's not very tall, it's very spread out. And alongside that, of course, there was other complementary investment needed in the economy. So the electricity grid itself, those networks, the reconfiguration of people's patterns of where they lived, because spread out plants were no longer in city centres, they were on city outskirts, so the housing and transportation structures changed. And then ultimately, the invention of consumer electronic devices that drove demand even further. So this was a long drawn out process, and the complementary investments needed to capture the benefits of electrification were large. And there's every reason to think that this is going to happen now. If we want to see process changes through the use of AI, it will require organizational change and infrastructure change. So what does make a country AI ready? As economists who do growth accounting, we often think about how does technology drive total factor productivity, the A in the equation, or how does it affect the inputs that are used? What we're talking about now is how does AI change the actual process of production, the production function itself. And so our focus needs to be directed towards what are those changes going on in organizations. We are doing a lot of work with organizations, qualitative as well as quantitative work, to try and understand how companies, businesses are now embedding the use of AI in their processes. And the answer in short is not much yet. How do we know what's going on? Well, we can look at the inputs for sure. We already heard about the energy constraint. That's going to be important. There's the labor input, which we might think about the skills needed. Analysis of the labor market focuses on what tasks are people doing, what expertise. We need to think more about how a task being rebundled and reconfigured. Data as an input. I think this is now a growing area of literature, but in terms of quantification, there's more work needed here to understand how much data is needed and how much value is it adding to production processes. There's the question of quality change and technical advance. We just heard how rapidly the models themselves are advancing. So in trying to understand the potential uses at the intensive as well as extensive margin, we want to understand that. One area that I think will be very interesting to look at in terms of measuring what's going on is how are people using their time. As consumers, we now spend an awful lot of time online, looking at our screens, and looking at the activities that people are doing online is captured in time use surveys. There's much less information about how do people use their time at work. But if you're interested in how are organizations changing, how are tasks being rebundled and changed, then we need to start gathering data on how people are using their time at work. Not just what tools, but how much time are they saving through using AI tools and doing existing tasks, and how much is that changing the workflow end to end within the organization. And then finally, a bit of a tangent perhaps, but production boundary changes. If you go back to the original Gary Becker work on time in the economy, he had an aside in that paper that the movement of activities across the production boundary could substantially change your interpretation of measured productivity. If we think about women in many countries going into the paid workforce in the 1960s and 1970s, that will have had a substantial increase on measured productivity growth in the formal economy. Now, as we see activities moving out from the market into the household sector, equally, this is changing how we interpret measured productivity, and at least some part of the productivity slowdown in the statistics will be a reflection of changes from paid activities to unpaid or household sector activities. So that's how we might start to know better what is going on across different countries. We also should be thinking about infrastructure readiness, and that's if you like, the the platform of tangible and intangible assets on which different organizations, both public and private sector, can build their own activities. If you're thinking about the use of AI across the economy, there are lots of coordination challenges. In any technology, there's a question of setting standards, and there are plenty of examples where a standard set unleashes the scale of the market and enables rapid learning by doing, brings costs down, enhances diffusion. In some of the complementary assets for AI, there are large network effects, and so that too is a kind of coordination problem. There are, in particular, if we're going to the agentic AI economy, questions about intellectual property and legal liability, and also do agents need identities? So a digital public infrastructure has an identity layer, and countries like Estonia or like India, for example, that have that, are seeing rapid building of new businesses using that digital identity layer. But do the agents themselves need a formal identity? So how is that entire soft infrastructure framework going to work for agentic AI? And then there's the question of the data layer. There's a lot of data in economies that is untapped, but figuring out the terms of access, the credentials for access, how to structure and organize the data, how to enable privacy when different types of data are being linked together. A lot of very detailed questions in that. And I think there are not many economies that have got very far in thinking about the institutional frameworks for both the identity layer and the data layer. But the private returns and the productivity of using AI will depend very much on economies assembling this whole digital public infrastructure, the whole stack. So a big challenge there for many countries. One way to think about this is through a public value framework, which I have used in different roles in the past, where often if you're thinking about an investment project, you're in the left-hand column here, you're in the direct column. This is the cost-benefit analysis column. And you can think about benefits to individual citizens or to public and private sector organizations. And there we are thinking about immediate efficiency and cost efficiency gains and cost savings. And then you can go on to thinking about what are the spillovers and the coordination or network effects that you can capture. And then you can go on to think about what are the longer term dynamics of the kind that I know Brian has been very focused on in his work. The text on this slide is from the UK Treasury, and it's an evaluation retrospectively of the creation of the one login for UK citizens to government services, and seeing how that fits onto this public value framework. And so this is you can see that the way that they thought about it was very much focused in the cost-benefit side, the immediate efficiencies, and much less in the dynamic and market-shaping aspects of this. But you can see that this framework provides a way of thinking about what is the infrastructure need and where are the gaps in public infrastructure to enable the productivity gains to be built on top of that. So the question about national capability or readiness for AI comes down for me to enabling these process changes. What is our markets dynamic? Is there enforcement of competition policy so that startups can get into the relevant markets and so that new business models can become viable? We know that there'll be labor reallocation that goes on. In past technological revolutions in recent times, governments have not done a great job at helping people make that transition. And so thinking not only about skills and long-term provision of skills, but also enabling transition for individuals is part of the institutional, the social process, if you like, of using AI, because without that, we're likely to see quite a lot of resistance within organizations to change. Why would you encourage, enable adoption of a technology that might put you out of a job? There's this question of what Joe Stiglitz and Andrew Greenwald have called a learning economy. Where are the feedback loops? Are the policy institutions such that lessons can be learned relatively rapidly in an agile way and fed back to adjustments in policy if necessary? Mechanisms of accountability. And so this goes to the point about liability. We have had a very large scandal in the UK of the Horizon post office scandal, where many people who ran post offices were falsely accused of fraud. Some were imprisoned, and many had their careers and lives ruined by it. And the computer system was wrong. It was making errors. We can't, if we want to see AI spread and its use be enabled in automatic and agentic ways, there are going to need to be mechanisms of accountability, liability, and redress. And that, I think, is a big institutional challenge. Supply chain bottlenecks, and I won't belabor that because those issues are very well known, but everything from chips at one end to skills at the other end. And then finally, this question of organizational change. So here are the people working on an old-fashioned assembly line, and we're obviously having people work in very different ways now. And to my mind, organizational change is going to be one of the slowest things to limit the diffusion of AI throughout the economy. Just one final slide, and I think AI requires economic analysis to take some steps forward as well. In the labour market analysis, we've been very focused on task-based models, and that's a great perspective, but I think going beyond that to understanding the way that processes change in that end-to-end way will become important. We're doing a lot of work that's on this border between classic industrial organization and management studies, organizational studies. One hypothesis about the impact of AI on organizations is that it will enable the capture of contextual tacit knowledge, which might reverse the decentralization in organizations we've seen in the past 30 or 40 years, and a return of hierarchy. And there's a question about what does that devaluation of tacit knowledge mean for organizational structures, the way people work, income distribution, and so on. Integrating the microanalysis of organizations with the analysis of industrial sectors or markets or ecosystems or regions, however you want to frame it, but that mid-level between micro, what happens in firms, and the macro level, both of which I think are better analysed at the moment. And then this question about vintages of capital. I've put here an image of Cambridge, where I'm sitting now. It refers, of course, to the two capitals controversy back in the day, where the idea that capital is fungible won out in the end. But when you're talking about periods of technical change, the embodiment in both physical and human capital means that different vintages have different quality and different affordances. And I think revisiting these vintage models will be really interesting. And then finally, using AI in economic research itself, which I think is now starting to happen very quickly, but it offers us a fantastic new tool for economic analysis. So that's a whistle-stop tour through a few thoughts about what makes countries ready and able to use AI to improve productivity and living standards, which is what ultimately we all care about. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Diane. So I apologize again for the pressing time, but I think you have managed to put together some of the thoughts, and we can think about recommendations. Basically, from what I learned from you, we need to have structural thinking of the possible factors, and you listed a bunch of factors as Brian Arthur would say that technology is about the efficient combination of those factors. And you particularly talk about that infrastructure matters a lot. But what's probably more important is that we need to have, inevitably, we need to have organizational change, and also important that we need to have a good measurement system, analysis system that to know how effective it is, and probably put all those together, we can have a clue of even with the uncertainty, how the countries can embrace the technology better. But even with that, I still have a couple of questions. I'm thinking about how Diane would recommend Europe or UK to do this. But I would think shallowly maybe that the dynamic demand, as Carlota mentioned, is important, and maybe that very aggressive government role could play a role. We can already see a couple of successful, relatively successful models at this stage in US or China, a little bit better than some others, but I think probably those factors are a bit more important than others. I'm not sure about the answer. I'm just guessing here from what I learned, but thank you a lot. And if you can have very quickly answer this, it really appreciate. I know your time is pressing, and actually the next speaker also have to leave at 12 o'clock and sharp. But anyway, I would like to hear you. Maybe you can quickly respond a bit. I will let you go.
I'll keep it very brief. I think this is why so many countries are now talking about industrial policy. It's a recognition that governments can shape their economies. And in fact, when there are technological revolutions, either acting or not acting will shape the future of their economy for a long time to come. And so all the more reason to think about it in a strategic way. And so many European governments are doing exactly that.
Okay, thank you very much. So our last speaker will be Professor Avi Goldfarb from University of Toronto, and he is the Rotman Chair in AI and Healthcare and the Professor of Marketing of the university, and he is a leading scholar at the intersection of AI, economics, and business strategy. And I today would like him to talk about both AI as technology and the business as a technology, how we should effectively combine them together. So that is a very important angle to answer the theme we would like to talk about today. So without further ado, Avi, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be speaking after all those really interesting talks. Though you'll hear some similar themes to what has already taken place, and a couple new ideas in terms of thinking about competition. So, when we think about technological change, one framework that we use in economics is to try to identify which particular, like for that technology, what's gotten better, faster, and cheaper. And so there's work by Nordhaus and Bresnahan that talk about computing. And as computers got better, they assert the major change in the world was in terms of the cost of arithmetic. Your ability to add and subtract got better and better and better to the point where today we use computers for problems that you never would have thought of as addition or subtraction questions. So the early applications of machine computing, of machine arithmetic, were for good old-fashioned arithmetic problems in terms of calculating the trajectory of flight and in terms of counting. But as that machine arithmetic got cheaper, we started to use it for music and mail and pictures and all sorts of other things that we never used to think of as arithmetic problems. With the rise of the internet, Hal Varian and Carl Shapiro pointed out in their book, The Information Rules, that the internet enables cheap search and cheap transportation of information. Catherine Tucker and I, in a JEL, Journal of Economic Literature, also pointed out that it ended up reducing the cost of copying information, of tracking information, and of verifying information. And so that name, Information Rules, was this, the rules of the information age, but also that information is in charge. That was sort of the double entendre in the book title. But it is, it points out that certain things got cheaper, and that is under the hood what's transforming the economy. Today we're talking about artificial intelligence, and my co-authors and I, Jay Joshua and I, said, under the hood, what's been going on in artificial intelligence for the past 20 years, most noticeably since 2012, has been advances in computational statistics, in the ability to fill in missing information. And so we frame that as a drop in the cost of statistical prediction, and that's the theme of our initial book, Prediction Machines, and more recently of power and prediction. That intuition that AI is doing prediction is useful for understanding the first wave of what happened with AI in business applications, as in perhaps the first large-scale business applications were in banking and insurance. For example, if you're a lender, you want to know if somebody's going to pay back their loan. And increasingly, lenders have been using machine learning tools. They've been using AI to predict whether someone's going to pay back the loan. But just like with arithmetic, as machine prediction got cheaper, we realized there's a bunch of things that we never thought of as prediction problems that can be solved with cheap machine prediction, like language translation, diagnosis, writing, drawing, and coding. Never really thought of machines that write, draw, and code or we never thought of the human actions of writing and drawing as prediction tasks, but that's what they are. You're filling in missing information. If you ask for an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol, you get an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol. How do you get that? It's not a search engine. It's instead using data, because it's computational stats. It's statistical prediction. It's using data on astronauts, data on images of people on horses, images of data on the style of Andy Warhol to predict what you're looking for when you ask for an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol. Now, if a machine instead is trained on data from what's going on in our scientific journals, then in principle, that prediction task can lead to, that underlying prediction technology can lead to a real scientific transformation. So Dario Amodei has this fantastic essay called Machines of Love and Grace. Amodei is the CEO of Anthropic, and in his essay, he provides an optimistic scenario of what AI could do. And fundamental to that optimistic scenario is we all now have access to the entire scientific literature. As in, we have access, he frames it as a country of geniuses in a data center. We have PhD level and beyond intelligence, knowledge, that in response to a query, we can get, or at least will soon be able to get, a thoughtful response. As in, we have a query and it fills in the missing information of that response. So given machines that can draw, write, code, and synthesize, and perhaps even create, by filling in missing information, extraordinary knowledge, it should be no surprise that lots of people are thinking about AI as potentially the next general purpose technology. And in many ways, the other speakers were all starting from the premise that AI, in many ways, is a general purpose technology. What distinguishes general purpose technologies from other technologies is that, yes, they are useful, like other technologies. Yes, they are used in lots of different industries, like other technologies. In addition, there is a positive feedback loop between the producing and using industries. And so what distinguishes a general purpose technology from another technology is the producing industry. In the case of, say, computing, the semiconductor industry, creates innovations that then lead to downstream innovations in peripherals and software and how to apply those, the co-invention required downstream that Diane Coyle referred to, that then in turn leads to further upstream innovation in in how chips are made and how computers operate, which then in turn leads to further downstream innovation. So in our standard growth model, like our 1950s solo style growth model, in the long run, there's no growth. What Bresnahan and Trachtenberg pointed out, that one way to get growth, to get outsized growth from one technology, is that if that innovation leads to downstream innovation, which leads to upstream innovation. So you have this feedback loop that still in the long run there, until the next innovation comes along, there is no growth. But it means that each general purpose technology has an outsized impact on productivity relative to other technologies. Florenta Theodoridis and I have a paper that suggests that machine learning is likely to be the next general purpose technology, along with, or at least relatively likely to be the next general purpose technology, along with a series of other data science related tools. The real challenge in writing this paper is we realized that GPTs, general purpose technologies, can only be discovered, at least by the definition, after they've already widely diffused and the feedback loop has happened. And so if you want to rigorously figure out whether something's a general purpose technology, you have to wait 40 years. Okay, and that's frustrating. And so all we can do is look for these hints early on. And in our paper, we say relative to a set of other emerging technologies, AI or machine learning is likely to be a GPT. Now, I want to turn to a quick discussion of market power. And so the rest of this talk, I want to talk about, I'm an IO economist, and I want to talk about competition in AI. And the key thing is to recognize that for this feedback loop to get going, we need downstream innovators to trust enough that the upstream will keep innovating and won't price them out of the market. And we need the upstream to then feed into the downstream. So we need that feedback loop to happen. And I'm worried. I think AI is our best chance to have a massive productivity improvement overall, and productivity determines our standard of living. So my worry is that we don't have enough AI. But I think it's still an open question whether we will see competition or whether today's largest tech companies will be able to extend their market power to emerging markets. And if that happens, the feedback loop may never get going. There's lots of good news. The good news, for example, is that we currently have competition. You heard earlier today about DeepSeek and Gemini, and we already know about OpenAI and others. There's a lot of different companies, some established and some new, some closed, some open. And then there's lots of other companies building specialized applications in driving and banking, financial services, graphic design, and healthcare. So there's really good news that we have lots of participants. There's also good news potentially on the cost structure of AI. So yes, there are fixed costs to setting up a model, but there's non-trivial marginal costs in terms of compute power and energy. And earlier, we heard discussions about how do we think about those demand for energy and the cost of energy. But if there's non-zero marginal costs, then many of our standard models can apply here, unlike the sort of platform-based software industry that we saw. And it's still an open question about how this is all going to play out, whether the fixed costs are that high that the positive marginal costs are still effectively zero or not. But there is good news that with positive marginal costs that may even be significant relative to fixed costs, that it's less likely to be a winner-take-all type market. There's good news on open models because we've seen open models mean that the laggards can be a few months behind the leaders, which then means sustainable market power will be pretty tricky. There's also good news once you remember that these are prediction machines, in the sense that while more data is better, there are decreasing returns to data in a statistical sense. Okay, so so if you think about textbook economies of scale, we get increasing returns. But data, we know that predictions improve in the square root of n. And so for any given use case, the marginal impact of a particular amount of data is decreasing in the amount of data you have. Now, there's going to be threshold points on which you need enough data to generate a new use case. But fundamentally, there are these decreasing returns to scale to data conditional on a use case. So it's not all good news. There are things to worry about as well. So probably the central thing to worry about maybe is what Sutton called endogenous sunk costs. When an industry begins, entry costs can be low. But as the market leaders compete, and the technology improves, it becomes harder and harder to catch up to the frontier. So the dynamics of competition can often, in technology markets, lead to a natural oligopoly. Typically not a monopoly, but a natural oligopoly where a new entrant is going to have to spend billions and billions and billions to catch up to the market leaders. Sutton, in his 1998 book, documented that this occurred in a lot of technology industries already. And there's reasons to worry that this same phenomenon might happen with AI, where we're seeing billions and billions and billions being spent. And it's an open question whether that's going to lead to sustainable competitive advantage for the few companies that get ahead, in a way that Sutton documented in airlines and for a long time in computer chips, etc. Now, secondly, while on the reasons to worry, while there are decreasing returns to scale for every use, new uses can be found. And Posner and Weil argued that such new uses can create this stepwise function in terms of minimum efficient scale that temporarily can create market power with each jump. Finally, to the extent that there's learning from feedback, then the feedback loop can push against the decreasing returns to scale in data. And so this is an argument that Google and Microsoft have been having about the advantage of Google search. And there's suggestive evidence, going both ways, but the story here is when the feedback loop is fast, then the story is when the feedback loop is fast, you having more data gives you the ability to have even better predictions, which then in turn gives you the ability to have more data. Two more things to worry about. Another thing to worry about is regulatory pushes to monopolization. So if the regulatory environment is focused on other harms and not competitive harms, then we know from theory and a number of research in other contexts that small administrative costs can deter entry, and regulation that restricts who can enter and how they enter and places a burden on new firms can lead to a force to market power. And there's plenty of evidence, for example, that GDPR and privacy helped the dominant players do even better, at least in Europe. Now, last thing to worry about is tying. So AI is going to be a complement to many other information technologies. It already is, from office productivity software to cloud services to chips, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if the AI is tied to other services with a dominant company, for example, the companies that own the interface between the user and the AI, this could both reduce adoption and increase industry rents. And all this, of course, depends on an endogenous regulatory environment. And our newest NBR AI book is coming out soon, The Economics of AI, Political Economy, that emphasizes the importance of the endogeneity and the importance of the regulatory environment, understanding the competitive future and also just the future of AI writ large. So AI might be the next general purpose technology. It's not making decisions yet, but that can be blurred. But under the hood, it's prediction technology. There's good news on competition, open source, and diseconomies of scale and data. But there are things to worry about with respect to other ways that data can enable market power in terms of AI regulation and in time. Thanks so much. We've got time for a question or two.
Well, thank you very much, Avi, and I apologize for leaving you to the end. And so I also would like to point out that besides your popular books, and also I love your summary, the digital economics you wrote in Journal of Economic Literature when I was in the company as a strategy officer. Actually, I read it very carefully, and I think it gave me a lot of motivation practically. So I recommend everybody to read it. Now, coming back to what you said, I think that a couple of things. One thing is that you do point out that the general purpose technology actually it can only be discovered, seems to be, and that seems a little bit like what Brian has suggested. But then, what our companies are doing in that strategy, I mean, it cannot be like that. So, how can you, plan this even better? That's a question imposed to Brian also. Now, another thing is that I think you gave a lot of good suggestions. If we think about a country, a healthy ecosystem, many good measures. You talk about good news, bad news. Essentially, from what I learned, we would like to see many participants. We need to have a good cost structure. We need to have a good government role, but that is tricky because government have to balance between encouraging or limiting. Now, because that's going to impact of the industry, and so all those things matters. So from that point of view, it's not clear how to think about the government's role right now. Anyway, so those are a couple of things. One, if you think business is a technology, or economy is as a technology to embrace AI, what is this technology can only be discovered, or we can do better than that? The second is, how do you recommend on the government role?
So I do think business is a technology, and a lot of that co-invention that I described at the beginning occurs in businesses. So we're going to need to figure out new ways to sort of organize the factory floor in modern business to accommodate AI. And that's a theme that you've heard, all morning or all evening in your case. Now, government role, I think there's a role for vigorous antitrust. I think there's a role for making sure we have very clear rules of the game. And maybe the best way to say this is I think the governments need to go in eyes wide open in recognizing trade-offs between certain kinds of regulation, for example, around privacy and competition. My role as the economist, I can tell you that there are trade-offs, and then it's the political class's goal to figure out how do we weigh those trade-offs? But I'm very comfortable saying there are trade-offs between sort of consumer protection and other types of regulation and competition in the context of AI.
Let me add a particular question, maybe to all. NVIDIA is a very big company. If we think about judging by the market cap compared to the GDP, it's the third largest economy in the world. Is it too big? Or it's not? It's competitive because it's growing like 50% every year. What do you think, Avi? If we're talking about government.
I think that's a big open question, and it's something that needs rigorous study. And I don't know the answer.
Right. I don't know either. So I'm trying to squeeze the answer. Anyway, so I think I will. I'm apologize for I'm bad in managing the time, but I really love everybody's talk. So I think I hate to cut short of everybody's talk. So I think if people have to leave, I understand, unfortunately. But then for the rest of us, let's chat a bit more and open for questions. But let me propose just one observation. If we think about what I think Carlota just mentioned in the beginning, then also I think Hongjiang mentioned exciting but a bit scary agentic economy. I'm not sure that agentic economy is consistent with Carlota's vision, and how should we get to that? Anyway, so that's just one observation. I also asked some questions earlier already to Carlota and other speakers, and it's open to open the floor for the more questions for anybody who's interested. Carlota, do you want to answer a bit in some of the questions asked earlier?
Yes, I would very much like to. Actually, this has been fascinating because it just proves how complex this topic is. I mean, you can take it from any side, and it's a whole can of worms, you know, whatever you do with it. So, I mean, going from the bus that we don't know where it's going all the way to Diane Coyle's changes in things, or is it Avi Goldfarb's this whole range of possibilities of study. So I'm going to try to do it from my point of view, which is that I actually go above the actual technology and try to see how society confronts this whole set of changes. So first of all, you asked whether AI is a revolution. That's similar to Avi's question about whether it's a general purpose technology and so on. The thing is that from the way I have looked at history, a technological revolution is a whole range of interconnected and interdependent technologies. And what this has been, I think, what's his name? Hongjiang Zhang. Sorry. Difficult. I guess we are difficult also for the Chinese. We have gone from just the transistors and the microprocessor, and then we have computers, and then we had internet, and then we had, we've been going from one to another revolutionary technologies, and they're all one after the other. They build on what the previous one did and transform it somehow. So I believe that we are really still shaping the information revolution, and it is still harming society because it's still dividing, it's still making the rich richer and the poor not necessarily coming out of the hole. So we have a very big social problem as a response to this enormous potential that we have with the technology. We have not been able to shape it. So you asked about the middle class. The idea is that lots of middle class people are going to lose their jobs and that we're going to be in trouble. The middle class in the first revolution was the bourgeoisie, was the capitalists. That's the middle class. Then we come to the second revolution, and the middle class was the educated people in between, where the bourgeoisie or the upper class together with the aristocrats. Then we get to the third revolution, and we have something called the worker aristocracy, which were the highly skilled workers in the heavy engineering industry, together with this enormous layer of white-collar workers in all these big organizations, which Weber explained, how you had these now big, precisely monopolies, because every technology has led, well, the second one didn't have size enough to make big monopolies, but the third and the fourth definitely created monopolies naturally, because that's the whole thing. And then you have oligopolies, and you have the government needing to see how serious it is for society to let those monopolies work. But they're the engines of growth. We needed the big companies. We needed the big automobile companies. I mean, society needs engines of growth, but they have to be sort of regulated, controlled, so that there is no exaggeration. So that's one important thing. But the other thing that's very important is that the middle class, as it moves up to the, say, the blue-collar workers in the mass production revolution, the middle class was the blue-collar workers. So we are like going up and then going down in society to get the middle class goes up and up and up from the bottom, right? The thing is that this middle class, these middle class jobs, these middle income jobs, when they went from the US and Europe to China and to the rest of what were then developing countries, became low income jobs. So it's not really in the nature of the job. It's in the nature of the social institutional structure that decides how many, you cut the number of days. So if you have less hours, so you can have more people, you cut the day, the working day, the working week, the working year have all been cut with each revolution, precisely because high productivity reduces the amount of work needed for each thing, so you can spread the work and you can open the leisure time, etc., for people. So these are all social-political decisions. They're not about technology. It's not the technology that decides who is middle class. It's society that decides who's going to be middle class. And of course, that means that you have income that makes you middle class because you're comfortable. What is defined as middle class at the time and what's defined as the good life at the time. Now the good life could be completely different from the super consumerist thing that we had in the mass production world. Then you asked another question about Europe. What should Europe do? Well, I sort of mentioned what AI could generally do for the world, but particularly for Europe. Europe happens to be in the world the top in terms of welfare state. They have the best, the most complete welfare state compared to America, way beyond if we take the most advanced countries in Europe. And society expects that people will be in, the good life is something that's very much expected in Europe, whereas in the US, there is much more of this, each person is responsible to what happens to them. There is this, it's a different culture. So what I believe is that Europe, and I have proposed it in a paper, not just about information, not just about AI, but about information technology in general, is that Europe could be the European way of life model that could become an export industry at the same time as the welfare state model. I'm sure China will also develop its own, and there'll be maybe competition between the two. But I think that possibility is open and Europe is not taking it. The whole thing, education, longevity, health, all those things can be right now improved with information, with artificial intelligence, and they could become a different thing. We could have and I think Europe can definitely, rather than try to compete, making the AI things like obviously the US and China, to become the leader in the use, in the social use especially. And you asked another question, which I'm not sure I remember what you meant. You asked about the government role, perhaps, in this thing. There are two things that governments do. One is they give, well, there are many things that governments do, but I mean, there are two very important ones. One is that every time we get to this point of chaos, when political parties are dividing, when there is this just not understanding, when people are angry because generally whatever was the middle class in that particular previous revolution is losing out. And lots of people lose their jobs, lose their skills. That's what creative destruction is. So you necessarily have this huge problem of lots of people who have lost their future. And then you have in front of that populist leaders who will offer to make America great again, or to regain control of our borders, or whatever. It's always about something in the past that people used to think they had, which was their future and the future of their children. They lose that. And what the government can do, as FDR did in the US and as the whole of Europe did after the war, is to actually pick up those losers, actually create an affordable new life and precisely create this new middle class. Because this thing that I was saying, that every golden age is about progress, growth, and justice, increasing progress, increasing justice, increasing growth. And of course, with this demand coming along, that is what happens with every revolution. And the information revolution has not been shaped yet. We are in that horrible moment, like the 1930s, And now, where people are so desperate, so frustrated, so hurt, so resentful, that they will vote for any madman as long as they offer, I will take revenge for you. I'm going to hate the enemies. It was the Jews in the 30s. It's now the migrants and Muslims, whoever everybody decides it generally, as long it's the different from us. So nationalism grows in these times because there is a fertile terrain for it. So artificial intelligence is a powerful tool to confront that. And what I think is that we need to start thinking about how to use artificial intelligence and the whole of the information revolution to create better conditions that will overcome the current populist need, practically, because people are so frustrated. Inequality has reached unbearable levels. The rich are becoming so rich. I mean, somebody can ask for $1 trillion salary, and somebody else, and all the CEOs of companies, they're earning millions of dollars, 100 times what their average employee earns. I mean, this level of inequality is unbearable. So, of course, I'm not saying that AI is going to solve inequality. It's precisely if you can do all the things that have to be done around. But I guess that's enough time for myself. There's only 15 minutes left for everybody else. So, but you asked me 4 questions. I tried to answer them all.
That's great. I really appreciate it. So we've been dominating the time, so I'd like to probably open up the floor for anybody who wants to comment or ask questions. Anybody? Oh, Naki.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, let me first say this was really a brilliant marathon session. I really enjoyed it. All of the talks were really great, and I fully agree with Carlota that you know, you look at this and complexity blows into your face. It's like a whole universe. So I don't want to take any time. I know it's very late. Let me just say that, you know, I think that Brian's metaphor or mystery tour is really appropriate, even though some of us might know where we are going, but collectively we definitely don't know. And one thing we did not discuss that I just wanted to raise as a question that troubles me a lot. Assuming that this is a true revolution, that we have a convergence of many systems together into a true revolution, and not just AI, but a whole cluster of systems, I was just wondering, you know, can we say anything about our role into the future that might be dominated with artificial agents? You know, let me just say, you know, if you look at the wars like Ukraine, it is the drones and the systems infrastructure around it that decides who lives and who dies. So, you know, it's even worse than just poverty, inequality. It is the fact that the systems are taking over our life in some ways, but also one can turn the question around. So I will stop here. If you turn it around and think in the long term, if it's really true revolution, then the question might be also what will be our role in a society that might be dominated with artificial agents, and what will be the role of artificial agents in such a society. So I think this dual paradox for me, I think, is a real challenge that I'm trying to wrap my head around. So thanks for a great event.
Anybody wants to answer? That's just very challenging question. You really don't want to lag behind, as many already talked about. Carlota just emphasized, but then there's so many horrible things happening, or make us worried. Anybody else?
Brian is.
I'm happy to say
Yes,
something.
Brian.
Yeah, actually, I think that Naki just posed what's the most important question. I thought all the talks, by the way, were excellent, and I particularly, well, I shouldn't say particularly, I enjoyed them all. And I thought we learned an awful lot about productivity and debated, is this a revolution or not? We doubling times, exponential growth, etc., etc. But I think the biggest question, and this is what Naki is putting his finger on, the biggest question isn't, what will happen process technology or what will happen general purpose technologies. The huge question is what will happen us? What will happen us as human beings? We simply don't know. But that doesn't mean the world we're moving into we don't know about. But I think there's plenty of precedents for that. We're roughly, if you want yet another analogy, where are we? Are we in the 1930s and so on? I think we're in 2020, March, where COVID struck us, and we didn't know what the hell was going on in March 2020. That's in the US, maybe slightly differently elsewhere. We didn't know how things would work. We didn't know how lethal it was going to be. We didn't know what to do. We didn't think we'd get vaccines very fast. And there were multiple factions, do this, do that. China had a totally different approach. Sweden had a different approach. And it doesn't, my main point I want to make very quickly is it doesn't mean you can do nothing. What you can do is think, what if this, what if that? There's a wealth. I'm not an admirer, by the way, of science fiction. I was once asked at YASA, did I read much science fiction? And I said, yes, I do. I read a huge amount. It's called economic theory. And sorry to be cynical here, but at any rate, yes, there are people who've thought about what about this, what about that. And I think that small numbers of people, people like the ones who are gathered here, people like the Lohan Academy, people who think ahead, government people, philosophers, it behooves us to think, what would this world be like? What if that happened, etc. That way we're not just going blindly into something. For yet another analogy, we're driving at night with the headlamps on and you can only see 200 meters and then there's a corner. But it doesn't mean you can't drive. It means you just have to keep your eyes skinned. You really need to know what's happening. And it's good to have a vague map in your head. That's why systems of thought like Carlota's and like several other we heard today are extremely useful. We don't know what's going to happen, but we can expect this or maybe that. That way we're prepared. And so it's not that we're walking blindly or sleepwalking totally. We don't know what's going to happen, but at least we can think hard. What of this? What of that? And make preparations.
Anybody else? Well, I think we are, if not, then we're quite over time, but I think it's really a marathon, but I think it's exciting and I am grateful that and congratulate everybody who still stay. And I think my colleague reminded me earlier that we should take a photo. Let's do that.